John Peel's the most important DJ of all time, I think.
It wasn't like he was just like a DJ that played obscure music. He was really, really important culturally, you know?
He was a soothsayer. He saw what was coming.
Whenever I hear John's name, I just inwardly bow.
John Peel set the musical agenda across 5 decades, challenging his listeners and the establishment.
John Peel shocked listeners by admitting he'd suffered from VD and discussing the beauty of women's nipples.
It's too much. He was a subversive, no doubt about that.
An obsessive collector, he amassed a priceless hoard of more than 100,000 records.
This is a guy that goes and builds probably this extension to his house that's bigger than his house, to go and house all of these records that he simply does not want to part with.
But set apart from the heaving shelves of vinyl and stacks of CDs, here, in John's study, lies a small wooden record box containing just over 100 vinyl 45s.
We thought he was so, public and outspoken and included us all, but somehow he kept a few secrets.
Secrets that reveal the soundtrack to his life.
When we looked through the box when John died, I was actually quite surprised. Quite a few of them didn't seem to make any sense, and I was desperate to ask him why that was in, but we'll never know.
Tonight we reveal what's inside John Peel's record box and how the memories it contains tell the story of a shy, obsessive schoolboy who became music's most devoted champion.
More of the same unpleasant and disorientating racket on tomorrow night's programme. Until then, from me, John Peel, good night and good riddance.
It's going to be a bit wonky, I think. Checking a little bit, bits of plastic.
This is Psycho Daisies by the Henchmen.
That's all right. You can't help but like it, can you? That, to me, is the inspiration for my life, just sitting there in that box.
Uh-oh, and now I'm really in trouble because I don't know if that's the name of the artist or if that's the name of the track.
We've got
Mojo Workout by Larry Bright.
I'm like, and I thought I knew quite a lot.
Okay, I'm never going to go anywhere with these. Max Romeo.
Mike Frith and Chris Surf, whoever they are, they're probably just really glad that they're still got a mention.
For me, it was one of the amazing things when I actually heard about this box, that out of all of the records that he had, and there are tens of thousands of them, that he just had this little collection of things that in some way meant something very personal to him.
This is the box that John would have saved had his house burnt down. It would be the last thing he grabbed along with Sheila and his children as he careered out of the front door.
This small collection of records was a work in progress, frozen at the moment of John's death in October 2004.
Well, I think it's a sort of a collection within a collection, isn't it? If the collection was a safe place, this box sounds to me as if it represented the real safe place and the real sort of place from where John set out.
But one act dominates the box with almost 20 records. It's this duo who perhaps best symbolised John's all-embracing passion for music.
There's many.
It's upstairs, another one hiding there.
The White Stripes. Oh, lots of White Stripes.
White Stripes. And the White Stripes again. Oh, he's got a lot of our records in here. Good Lord. This whole section here has about 20 of our records in it, which is more than I have in my 45 box.
Even in his 60s, John was unearthing and promoting new talent. From Pink Floyd to the Sex Pistols, Rod Stewart to Radiohead, the White Stripes joined an exclusive club of artists who benefited from the legendary Peel effect.
I think what John loved about the White Stripes was the fact that they were utterly, utterly primal in every way. He performs like he's possessed, Jack White. He really does. And, you know, the way that his influences reach so far back into to so many familiar and well-loved places, the same sort of places that John adores as well.
If you put all these vinyl records together, the blues records, you know, the obscure blues records, the strange soul records, the political rock records, the novelty records, the punk records, you know, coming out of weird areas of Britain with handwritten notes, you know, you kind of get the White Stripes. You know, that's what it boils down to.
Who would have played a White Stripes record in radio in the UK before John did? Not many. In fact, it's a list of one. John.
We learned a lot from him. He's so on top of the game. Doesn't matter how long he'd been doing it, he really knew everything that was happening at the time. All the bands that were playing and what they were doing and what records they had done that he thought were interesting.
Their thirst for wanting to know more about music in the past, as it were. And he thought that was quite wonderful, their broad-mindedness.
His friendship with the likes of Jack White helped lay some of John's own past demons to rest. He'd had an uneasy relationship with fame over his 40-year career, often feeling uncomfortable with his celebrity and that of others.
He protected himself because he'd been hurt by having friends who became more famous, and then as they became more famous, they disappeared out of his life. That hurt him on a lot of occasions, and just didn't want to be hurt again.
It's such a treat to meet somebody in the position that he finds himself in at the moment who's prepared to talk to you about records, you know, because over the years, over the centuries even, we've lost many mates to showbiz, you know, people we've really liked, and then they've gone on to become fantastically famous and they've gone mad or have died or something or other, and it's intensely depressing.
I guess maybe we did connect with John. I mean, he's got so many of our records in here. It's a big compliment to have even one. I really wanted to become better friends with him because I really liked talking to him.
As he became older, he did handle it a lot better. When he was younger, when I first knew him, he became upset by it. But latterly, he coped with it much, much better and became a lot more laid back about it.
I'm thinking about my doorbell, when you're gonna ring it, when you're gonna ring it.
Towards the end of his career, this more relaxed John began to invite bands to his home in the country for a series of recording sessions.
The White Stripes played here. They did a live session here once, and John sat in the corner where his little studio corner was, and he couldn't wipe the smile off his face. He was enormously happy. He was there with his glass of red wine and friends around him and his family. The noise was fantastic. He was just in heaven.
The latest additions to the box, the White Stripes, reflect a Peel who is content with his life. But other vinyl footprints hint at the more turbulent days of the nation's favourite DJ.
Radio 1 hated him. Almost to a man.
As in every other place he went, he was an outsider.
The vinyl footprints left by the latest additions to John Peel's record box point to a man more relaxed with the world. In the White Stripes, he'd found a band that unified all that he loved in music, and in Jack White, a kindred spirit who shared his passion. But the earliest records from the box hint at less happy times. While post-war Britain was crooning along to Johnny Ray, it was in the repressive atmosphere of 1950s Shrewsbury School that a then 13-year-old John Robert Parker Ravenscroft was liberated by the cutting-edge sounds of trad jazz.
Its tempo, compared to the big band ballads of the day, it had this kind of furious tempo. It was almost like punk. I mean, you can't pogo to it, obviously. The effect it had on its audiences was pretty similar. I mean, if you wanted to impress a bird, you would take it to a jazz gig.
The music obsessive down the corridor made a lasting impression on one new boy.
I remember John, or Ravenscroft, J.R.P., as he was known. We never referred to each other by Christian names. Ravenscroft, J.R.P., lying on his back in the middle of the floor in his study listening to the music. And that was very weird behaviour.
Our childhood was quite bleak in a way. You know, we had a nanny. We didn't see much of our parents. Then our parents got divorced. Then we went off to school when we were 7. And I think collecting stuff, he surrounded himself with stuff. You know, he had records. It was all organised. So it was his way of organising the world and making himself feel safe.
John collected music and information about music, whereas others, sad ones like myself, would collect information about railway trains and engines and numbers. And there he is, yes, on the edge there. On the edge, just seems suitable. Even then, he's got a different colour jacket to everybody else. Anarchy personified at that time.
John's love of loud music was nurtured from an unexpected quarter. Housemaster Mr. Brooke had spotted potential in young JRP's all-consuming hobby.
His genius, really, with John Ravenscroft, was to see that this was what he wanted to do, this music line, and let him do it, and indeed encourage him to do it. Didn't always please the people in the next studies because the noise was rather considerable.
John was kind of, in a sense, liberated from a system he probably hated by this housemaster.
Any sense of freedom he had was short-lived, as he swapped the harsh regime of boarding school for a windswept army base in North Wales for 2 years of national service. But despite being a big Elvis and Gene Vincent fan, the box contains an altogether more poignant record.
I thought the Lonely Saturday Night by Dawn French. It's actually Don French.
Probably was his last year of service that my record came out. He was probably miserable. Lonely Saturday Night is a very, very sad song, as you know. No place to go. Everyone has a date but me. So he must have related to it.
He played it a lot. I know it word perfect, and we used to sing along to it together. So I guess I can understand why that's in there, because it sort of it meant a lot to him.
John was finally liberated from his institutionalised life as the swinging 60s dawned.
And this is Dallas too. It's big, and it moves.
But his isolation only got worse when his father shipped him off to America to work as an insurance salesman. It was to be in Dallas that John found a new teenage soundtrack to offset his alienation.
I think going to America was an unhappy time for John. You know, he'd been to school, he'd been in the army. Father wanted him to get a proper job and didn't appreciate that he might have found something that would lead to a proper job. So when he went to America, he was quite lonely.
I grew up to be very shy, you know, and it got progressively worse as I grew older. So it got to the stage when I was in America. At one stage, I was locked myself away for about 3 months in a room completely by myself. Actually, it was a little hut at the bottom of somebody's garden, and didn't come out at all for about 3 months, and had all food and things delivered to the door. And I spent the whole time fixing up the inside of this hut in the most sort of grotesque manner, like a spider's web, with miles and miles and miles of black string all over everywhere, you know. And I was sort of sitting there looking at this, and I realised, you know, that there's something going very wrong. And about this, obviously, you know, so about this time, the Beatles came along.
Well, I think the Beatles were sent from God to John, really, because being an American, coming from Liverpool, or actually not from Liverpool, we were slightly middle class, but when the Beatles were born, we all moved our birthplace, 8 miles north. Coming from Liverpool, he could be the authority on the Beatles, and I think that was wonderful for him.
A fellow at the radio station, which was in Dallas, Texas, was talking about Liverpool, he was talking this incredible rubbish. I called him up and sort of set him straight about it. And he said, well, would you like to come down and talk on the radio, And then it just suddenly opened up, and I thought, here we are.
And we love you.
Saved from the life of a salesman, John cashed in on Beatlemania and became the voice of British pop in Texas at the tender age of 22.
For the very latest information about the Beatles, Animals, Yardbirds, Rolling Stones, and all of the other famous English groups, listen for me, John Ravencroft.
His voice then is absolutely wonderful. He sounds like a sort of male Princess Anne. It's so far back. He used to be embarrassed by that, the sort of little old Fauntleroy tones.
When I have the honour of joining Bobby Davis and Kay nightly on KOMA, the only station with its finger firmly on the pulse of the English scene.
We've got a Beatles record here, Come Together, Octopus Garden, something. But it appears to be Russian. So, I mean, you know, DJs are easily bamboozled. So, I mean, to have a Russian record is perverse anyway.
He started to carve a niche as the professional outsider when he was poached by a bigger Californian station, a role that was to become a lifelong trademark.
I think it was a delicate balance for John and the station in that he was very popular. He had a big audience in his evening time period. The sponsors loved him. And so there was always this kind of an argument about, do we try to keep John disciplined to the format, or do we let him go and hope that the response is such that where the station gets ratings and makes money? And so they were always kind of playing that game with John, while the rest of us just were restricted to playing the top 40 hits and finding other ways to enjoy ourselves on the air.
We're going to play Mojo Hand here by Lightning Hopkins. So I can still remember to do it.
I lay down thinking. I was thinking about a Mojo Hand.
Artists like Lightning Hopkins weren't played on contemporary radio in the 1960s, possibly on some of the ethnic stations in large cities, but not on KMN or stations that were top 40 stations.
My woman so can't have no other man.
I think Peel could have got away with playing black music on white radio in America because, as in every other place he went, he was an outsider.
I don't really know what was going on in England, but I'm sure that listening to all the stories from those guys, that they just couldn't find those records, you know. And for John to play it was a big deal.
Oddly enough, everything he did was a kind of political act because he would play black music in times when it was deemed wrong, dangerous, subversive. You know, when you weren't allowed to do that, he would just do it.
It's astonishing. I mean, it would have been incredibly unheard of, I would have thought. I can't imagine anybody doing that, unless it was someone like John.
It was to be on one of his many nocturnal quests for new talent around the downtown clubs of San Bernardino that John was to discover what he recognised as the next sound.
He discovered the group The Misunderstood and just embraced them, and I'm assuming that because they would play much of the music that he liked, the bluesy music as well as the British pop music, he really felt they had some potential.
John first became aware of the band at a gig that we played at. We were just sort of together from that point on. He kind of became our big brother, surrogate father, whatever.
He became their manager and persuaded the band to seek their fortune in London. But that was news to his unsuspecting mother.
We get to 27 Jameson Street, John's mother's house, stack our equipment, unload it off the taxi cab, knock on the door, and there's no answer.
Nobody home?
And I think it was probably morning time because my memory is we sat there all day long.
Long.
And we were a bit pooped. And
it started to rain a little.
We came back one afternoon and there were these musicians on the pavement with a whole lot of boxes. They said, oh, John said we could come and stay.
She didn't know.
She didn't have a clue.
Not a clue.
So she rang John up immediately.
We mentioned John's name and her eye just, from what I recall, it was like,
another one of these deals.
Another John thing.
While John's dream career was taking shape, his personal life was faring less well. Being alone in America had led him into a disastrous marriage with 16-year-old Shirley Ann Milburn.
I think he was unhappy because of his marriage. I don't, there was always that sort of in the background because Shirley was a thorn in his side, quite honestly. Well, I think he was lonely. And Shirley, who he married, was also lonely. She lost both her parents in quick succession. I think John felt responsible for her, and he wanted to be with somebody. I think he didn't want to be on his own anymore. Simple as that.
His young wife found it difficult to cope with John's newfound celebrity status and became intensely jealous.
She was very young and I was very stupid, and it didn't work out really. And she thought that I was seeing other women, which I wasn't. But if any girl got in touch with me through the radio station, she'd go around and see their parents and cause trouble, you know. I was say anything for a quiet life, me, really, and I can't bear confrontation, and I was getting plenty of that. So decided to come back home.
The reason he left America was because he transported his first wife over a state line when she was officially underage. I think the age was 18 at the time. Well, I was married at 18 too, so but that made him a felon.
It was a very different world from the one he left, but now he was, now he had a career. And I think he came back to stay and felt confident about that. He knew who he was. When he'd gone to America, he hadn't, but he came back and knew who he was.
John's premature departure from the States turned out to be a blessing in disguise. Pirate radio was in full swing, and he soon jumped aboard.
We're going to play all of the records that have made us happy, an awful lot of very beautiful things to hear, and an awful lot of beautiful people to get to know a little bit better in the perfumed garden.
The Yardbirds, happenings 10 years time ago. Well, that's another mid-60s classic.
No, I'm extremely flattered that John chose happenings 10 years time ago and put it in his box, because I don't know, if I played it now, I might be shocked at how bad it is, but I haven't heard it for a while. It's quite a revolutionary record. It's completely psychedelic, and that's what he latched onto. Most DJs would have thrown it in the bin. Our friend John got it out and played the hell out of it.
Of course, the Yardbirds are so important, especially for just the blues worldwide, but especially in England. They were the band that really broke blues into popular rock and roll music.
So 1967, when John is on the pirate ship briefly, and then is called to Radio 1, this is the introduction to Britain of this very new American radio style. And people who get in at the right moment often become the most famous.
And good morning, everyone. Welcome to the exciting new sound of Radio 1.
But joining the establishment didn't mean this DJ was going to become a part of it.
I've done radio things for so long now, sort of let's move and groove, here's another knockout sound, sort of everything is wonderful and, the sun is always shining, sort of radio things in America. And the sun doesn't always shine, it's not always wonderful, And when things concern me, I like to be able to say so.
John Peel, who infuriated Harold Wilson when the government's Biafra policy was criticised on his programme. He shocked listeners too by admitting he'd suffered from VD and discussing the beauty of women's nipples.
Eccentricity, I think, is the word I'm looking for. John is, and if there's an eccentric, there's John.
Well, Radio 1 hated him, almost to a man. They didn't like what he did, didn't like what he played, didn't like the way he dressed, didn't like anything about him. He used to make sort of druggy-type signs behind his back, which was kind of bizarre, as John didn't even take aspirins. But he hung in there.
So I can understand how they would sit there trying to pull their hair out as to what the hell they were going to do about it. But the actual answer was quite a simple one. Do nothing. That's what's making him successful.
He was not going to do what Tony Blackburn or, all those horrible DJs were doing at the time. They were just feeding to the public what they were fed. John fed to the public what he liked.
He was always looking for the next thing and was willing not to just take whatever he'd seen written about it or go along and see it and make up his own mind. He was really good for music.
It was like he was desperate to show people what music was around, just that they just weren't hearing. And I just thought, you rebel.
The champion of cutting-edge music could count some of its bright young things as his friends. But John would soon discover the hurtful price of fame.
In John's mind, certainly, he thought that Bowie had just turned his back on him.
As they became more famous, they disappeared out of his life.
John Peel had turned his obsession for collecting vinyl into an art form on the airwaves, where he was rapidly making a name for himself. But it was on Radio 1 that he realised the true power of his independent voice.
He got himself in a really interesting position, a spot any DJ would want to be in, to be able to just play whatever you want.
Radio 1 was really a commercial radio, but without the adverts.
So they played stuff which was in the charts. This is what people wanted to listen to during the day. So in the evening, it was good that John was allowed the airwaves.
He fought for the underdog, and he fought for the small independent labels, and he fought for the bands that were making records in their living rooms and their back bedrooms or whatever, because he hated what he saw.
Let me away from home, just to save you from being alone.
He gave the Faces our first break. And he said, like, I like you guys. And we thought, well, no one knows about us.
The modest 29-year-old from Cheshire was helping to launch the careers of friends who were to become superstars.
I remember him telling me a story about literally giving David Bowie money to produce demos when he was a struggling artist. You know, many of these people have gone on to be the most successful performers and artists in the world.
I remember the first time I was asked to do a John Peel session to do something for the Empty Sky album. I was just, you know, it was like getting Top of the Pops. It was so important. Because if John Peel, you're on John Peel's program, it gave you a stamp of credibility.
He loved it when the artist was successful. I remember when Mark Bolan got to #1 with, I think it was Ride a White Swan, and John always said he was driving and he heard it on the radio, it was #1. He pulled over at the side of the road and wept copiously.
The outsider was now on the inside, but there was one person who helped keep his feet firmly on the ground.
I'm gonna always love you.
And when I met John, he certainly was relatively famous, but I wasn't enormously impressed with being part of a sort of a showbiz crowd, and neither was John.
I went to the wedding of John and Sheila with John in his Liverpool colours. Rod Stewart was there, I remember, because he and John had been thick as thieves. And Sheila in white, looking gorgeous, fantastic.
Yes, I will. I'll love you.
Feisty is a good word for Sheila. It was absolutely the finest thing that ever happened to her. Far better than any career things he had.
Despite his healthy scepticism for the glitzy crowd he'd somehow helped to create, he was sensitive to any exclusion.
When the subject came up, would say that people that had been his friends when they were on their way up forgot him when they made it.
I remember him telling me a story about when he tried to get backstage, unusually, to see David Bowie. He was quite adamant that somebody had gone to David Bowie and said, John Peel's outside, and Bowie had said, no thanks. But I'm sure that didn't happen. And there would have been about an entourage of 15 different hurdles to get through to get to Bowie. And in John's mind, certainly, he thought that Bowie had just turned his back on him. But there's some stuff in here which is, you know, you would hope to find in there. Mark Bolan, you know, is Mark Bolan talking to Steve Dixon, 1973. Now that, again, it's not, so presumably it's not Mark Bolan playing music, it's just in conversation. Well, yeah, hard to fathom, but there you go.
I was beginning, and I wasn't reaching any more people. I was just reaching about 40,000 people that were into Tolkien or fairy stories and things. And they bagged me as being like a rock and roll version of that, you know, which is not what I want to be. At this period of my life, I'm purely a rock and roll star.
Released after Mark's death in 1977, the single is a memento of a time when John had mixed business with pleasure and again put his energies into helping an unknown band.
We would book John out to do what he called the John Peel Roadshow, which was him and a box of records, and he'd take along Mark Bolan.
Mark wasn't like a human being. Mark was like a little pixie and just an adorable, fantastic man to be around. Rub shoulders with Mark and a little bit of stardust would fall on you.
Who's playing here, actually?
Well, right now there's a group called Tyrannosaurus Rex. Mark Bolan is well, there are only two in the group, and Mark Bolan is the singer, and he sings very gentle, soft little songs, and one of them's playing right now in the background, and it's very beautiful.
Okay, let's have a look.
Okay.
He really came to see Mark Bolan as a major artist and helped Mark a lot in the late 60s. Mark, of course, wanted to be famous.
I'm not gonna dance, my princess.
Over the next 3 years, the two men became very close. But it was a relationship that didn't survive Mark's success.
Well, Mark became a bit of a creep once he became successful, and it wasn't pleasant to see. I guess he was ingesting the wrong kind of food or something, but he became rather unpleasant. And that hurt John quite a bit.
The real end of the relationship was when Mark had his first big #1 record. And then as they became more famous, they disappeared out of his life. And that hurt him. We'd been incredibly good friends. He felt he didn't want to know us anymore, which was very sad.
If you're in a position to sort of promote, to put it on a sort of coarsest level, to promote people in their activities, to give them some sort of exposure, I think you have to put up with an awful lot of sort of false things.
Think of how many people would have tried to cash in on I helped popularize Led Zeppelin, or I helped popularize Pink Floyd. I mean, when these guys were selling tens of millions of albums around the world, John could have asked favors, or, well, he could have asked favors, but he didn't.
Sorry, John.
It's ethnic bird impression. Oh, that is fantastic.
Oh, the nice. Yeah.
That MC5, fucking hell.
The MC5 are in here too. It's not all weird shit.
It's worth a fortune, look.
The beauty of this box is you kind of never really know what's around the next corner.
The big three, I love the big three.
Wow, that feels so bad.
No, I don't know who that is either.
Ryehead, fucking hell.
Some chicken. I mean, why should I have a copy of Coronation Street by Izzy Royal?
Elmore James.
Are there people that know what all these are?
Obviously, he had a weird mind. I have a weird mind. Every record collector, every aficionado, every collector of anything has got to be a little strange.
A lot of the records in this collection, in this box, don't reflect the mainstream of pop culture, but every type of pop culture is here.
I mean, it's absolutely all over the place, which is what is so wonderful about it. I mean, you know, the one that everybody's going to pick up on, absolutely, is Sheena Easton, 9 to 5.
Oh, Sheena Easton. But I know that one.
I don't think John was a music snob. I mean, we all have our guilty pleasures, and this is obviously Sheena Easton singing 9 to 5 is a guilty pleasure.
I actually own 2 Sheena Easton records just because he made it okay to like Sheena Easton, because he started playing Sheena Easton records on his programme.
That was big. He used to play to all his gigs. In fact, he never did a gig that he didn't play it. And he rather liked Sheena Easton.
But Bill Oddie doing on Ilklimo Bartat.
What, the bird guy?
I was doing a radio show, I'm Sorry I Read That Again. I'd written hundreds of these extremely silly songs by and large. And I was just looking for ideas where I didn't actually have to write it anymore, in a sense, you see what I mean? You know, I sort of think, so a silly treatment of something instead.
It intrigued both John and I, and one of us, probably John, approached Bill and said, would you like to come and record it?
He rang up, I seem to recall, and said, you know, I'd love to record that because I am starting a record label.
The record label was called Dandelion after this hamster. The idea was to provide an alternative to the major labels of the day and have a bit of fun at the same time.
It's not something to risk as you get older.
It really works, actually. I was worried about when we put it on, I thought, oh dear, what's this going to be like? But it is genuinely funny 35 years later. There's not a lot of stuff you can say that about.
The key that this supplies actually to Peel's interest and taste is that nothing swayed him. He just trusted his own judgment. And even if sometimes we went, Sheena Easton or Status Quo is another one.
Get down, get her down, 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 get her down.
think the thing about Down Down, as with a lot of our records, is they're honest records. You know, they're recorded as they're recorded, but not too much added to them, and they're basic records. And I think that's partly what he liked about Quo. He liked that kind of appeal because, as I thought anyway, as I saw him, he was that kind of bloke. He was very down to earth, didn't like too much fuss, just get it on, get your head down and rock.
The least likely people to get their heads down and rock to vintage Quo were trendy clubbers.
In recent years, with him starting to do clubs again, the last sort of like 4 or 5 years is him doing these gigs again. I think he loved it. Down Down is just a great record to play in a club. It's just good, you can't not dance to it.
We know he had a little soft spot for us at times, but not to the degree where he went around in his special box. That's a real honour to anybody, I think, that thinks they're in John Peel's special box because of whom he was.
It was in 1976 that John was to wrongfoot both critics and fans alike. He reaffirmed his position as the champion of new music, and this music was to revolutionise a whole new generation.
In general, I think the response at the time from his long-standing listeners was, well, what are you doing to us? This is not 9 minutes long. This is not psychedelic. This is not trippy. This is not Deep Purple. This is terrible. This is throwaway. These people can't play.
I mean, everybody fucking goes on on the radio about how much they love John Peel, but I don't see many people actually behaving in the way that he behaved on the radio.
And that's the end of tonight's programme, in which you heard the Desperate Bicycles, the Slits, the Mekons, Alternative TV, the UK Subs and Sham 69. More of the same unpleasant and disorientating racket on tomorrow night's programme. Until then, from me, John Peel, good night and good riddance.
He still had that kind of sort of teenager's enthusiasm for new music.
And it wasn't until the punk thing started that, I mean, I assumed that all of my audience were going to go along with me, you know. I thought they'd be really pleased that there was been a bit of a change, but of course they weren't.
Just because you don't like necessarily what everybody else likes at that particular given moment doesn't make you elitist. It just makes you different.
In the summer, I wear my tube top.
I think he's always wants to uncover the underdog. He's doing the DJ's job, really digging deep for everyone else, finding the things that are coming out in little cracks in the cement around the world.
Summer, I wear my tube top, and Eddie takes me to the drugstore.
This unquenchable thirst that he had to discover the next great record before anybody else even knew it existed. I suspect it did border on being totally obsessive, and possibly on occasions, I'm sure some of the family might argue, was slightly unhealthily obsessive.
The pressure that he was under doing it sometimes really got him down.
I know that this is how I shall die, incidentally, is doing this, driving along at night, holding the cassette up to try and read the name of the band by the headlights of the car behind me, slap into the back of a lorry, and then people will say, he would have wanted to go this way. They'll be quite wrong.
He used to get quite depressed about the boxes and boxes of things that he just knew he couldn't get through, and he really wanted to, but there just weren't enough hours in the day.
I don't know when he ever had a chance to sleep. He must have been listening to music all the time and kind of filtering bands that he wanted to have on his show.
There was always another 10 minutes to listen to something new. He never turned anybody down. He always, send it and he'd listen to it, which is unlike anyone else I know.
He was always slightly worried that somebody else would come along and work harder than he did, or, listen to more records than he did, and therefore he might find something, somebody else might start finding things and he might get the sack, and if he got the sack, how was he going to pay for, pay the mortgage? And I'm not sure how much he really meant that. I think he probably did, actually.
Here we go, Papa Top, yes.
Papa Top, sip, Papa Top, sip, ha!
Good heavens.
That's a classic Skinhead record, that.
Whichever way the children turn out, every family must one day face the generation gap.
His unbridled enthusiasm allowed him to feel comfortable with music that others found problematic.
reggae had been thug music beforehand, skinheads and uneducated idiots. And as I grew up in the 70s, I didn't like those people, so didn't like the music, or at least didn't explore it. I liked some of the tunes. But then, if John Peel said it was okay, it was okay.
When he played Pop Top back in '69, he got a letter sent to him, I think, by the National Front, threatening him for playing Pop Top, which obviously made him play it even more.
Actually, I'm not surprised that he got hate mail from the NF. I mean, there was a time in 1976 when, you know, rock could have gone either way. There were swastikas around in the early days of punk. In the end, it was only really through punk and reggae coming together. And, you know, for a lot of us, we would have heard that Punk and Reggae on Peel show that led to Rock Against Racism. And British youth decided it was going to take sides on the side of multiculturalism. For a while, it was touch and go there, and Peel would have been in the front line of that.
He just plays what he felt at the time. And, you know, sometimes a lot of reggae music comes on, you know.
Yeah, you know, any man who can stand up and say, well, this is what I'm doing, you know, he's a great man.
Just immensely charming.
Oh, Superman.
I love that.
Oh, Superman.
This is the epitome of what John did. He changed lives, in this case Laurie Anderson's life, and made hit records. He was the only person to play this record when it came out. As they say in the trade, broke off his show.
I can imagine say a playlist meeting amongst daytime producers. Anybody would have thought, what is this?
He gave it a chance for, you know, for a lot of people to hear it. And I would never get that chance in the United States, never.
Is anybody home? Well, you don't know me.
It was a kind of national anthem. It was also a kind of weird, warped lullaby. To be one of the records in this small box, it makes me so happy, it almost makes me sad, you know.
I could see him sitting there going, well, I don't know what the hell it is, but I think people should be encouraged to do it anyway.
But we don't have the Björks, and we don't have the Laurie Andersons, and we don't have the White Stripes. Their music is fucked. And that's what John was trying to say, in the nicest possible way.
But although the box is a treasure trove packed from the bizarre world of Peel, there remain two defining musical loves. But mysteriously, one is missing from the box.
I quite wanted to go down in history as the man who put him on TV.
John Peel's record box was a work in progress, frozen at the time of his death. It's a reflection of the man's endless quest throughout his life for new sounds, and it also speaks volumes for what's missing.
I wanted to pick somebody who's like a favourite of mine for a number of years, and funnily enough, they've never done national TV in this country before. They've done a couple of local things, but they've never been on national TV, which seemed to me to be shocking. So I quite wanted to go down in history as the man who put him on TV.
With The Fall, you can never be absolutely certain what you're going to get. Sometimes it may not be what you want, but it's still, they're the Fall, that's all you need.
John's love affair with The Fall sort of transcend everything, because he just adored them. It's the only artist that is in its own separate place in his room. They're not incorporated into the rest of his record collection, and they are incredibly special to him.
But he once said on the radio it's like a soundtrack of his life or something.
The Fall is really an acquired taste. You either like it or you don't. You either love it or it's vile. Just made it possible for people to love us or hate us. I don't think he's trying to be, like, contrary or anything. I think, you know, he's really trying to enlighten people. He had a very strong sense of taste.
It wasn't, to be absolutely honest, it wasn't until about, you know, the second or third record, or perhaps even the second or third session, that I started to think, actually, this is really
something fairly astonishing.
He always stuck with us through thick and thin, you know, over the years, which is good. When we were in, he was with us, and when we were out, he was with us.
As a mark of his enthusiasm for the band, The Fall hold the record for the number of sessions they recorded for The Peel Show. 24 sessions over 27 years.
An email here from Sean Cordell, and it reads in part, "My youth can be tracked through the development of The Fall." A good way to spend your life, I think, Sean.
But true to form, John kept his distance from his musical hero.
The thing with The Fall and John was that they never spoke.
When they did see each other, it was just sort of like a grunt or a sort of a handshake or a punch on the shoulder or something like that.
But you'd never meet your heroes, you know what I mean? And vice versa.
I think it's a wise move for anybody to avoid meeting Mark E. Smith. It's my, you know, that's my experience.
Right, sorry.
If his favourite band The Fall couldn't fit into his special box, he made sure it contained 3 copies of his favourite single.
Isn't it about time we heard the best record in the whole history of the world ever, yet again? Well, why not?
Never heard of that. This record will make you cry if you really get involved in it, and it has made me cry, and I know it's made John cry because he told me.
I think he's kind of stolen it somewhat, the undertones as his own anthem.
He found something about that song that he loved. I don't know what, some kind of naive innocence that he picked up that we had. I need excitement and I need it bad. I think that's the kind of feeling that drives all great people to do something, you know.
It just works on all levels, and it appeals, again, because of the subject matter of it, I think appeals to every hormone-ridden teenager everywhere on the planet. Teenage dreams, so hard to beat. Things that are done very, very simply frequently are the cleverest things to do. It's very easy to overcomplicate things. Teenage Kicks is 3 chords. It's the same 3 chords that every kid learning to play guitar will learn within the first 20 minutes.
Amongst the records in the box are a number of personal letters. In this case, one written in 1978 from the Undertones, age 17.
All right, is this the original letter?
Dear Mr. John Peel, this is a letter from the Undertones in Derry.
To once again thank you for playing the record on your programme.
The effect it has is brilliant. Everyone, all our fans are delighted. If there's all our fans, all 10 of them. All 10 of them.
If there's anything we could do for you to show our appreciation, we would surely do it.
Sorry about the telephone calls. We must be giving you headaches every time we phone.
Without your programme and the loyal support our fans have given us, the Undertones would never have been born. And that actually is an astonishingly true statement.
I was shaken. Yeah, it was a bit of a shock. We didn't expect that, actually, that they were going to, when they were taking out the coffin, the family were carrying the coffin and playing Teenage Kicks. It was a hard moment.
I'm very happy to admit that I was just about holding it together up to that point, and then I lost it.
I think the Undertones represent every kid who's ever dreamed of getting out of a dead-end life. Because that's what all this box is about, isn't it? The whole box really is about teenagers getting their kicks, and that's what Peel did. He played music for teenagers to get kicks by, and the fact that when he died, it was his show on Radio 1 that had the largest teenage audience. I think that's even more fitting that Teenage Kicks would be his theme song.
Teenage dreams are hard to beat is a kind of nice summary, you know.
I'd quite like to have that on my tombstone.
John's place in music history in Britain will kind of never be replaced.
Who is the next guy that some bunch of kids from outside London can sit and send a record to and can end up on Top of the Pops 2 weeks later?
People either have to sort of die or disappear to be appreciated.
In spite of all the managerial pressures on him to change, to compromise, to sell out, he never did it. And he's a shining example to all of us about how you live your life, basically.
He was a great national figure, but that's not the sort of thing he would have ever wanted to be.
I wonder where he's going tonight.
Tickets for the UK Music Hall of Fame live induction event on the 16th of November at Alexandra Palace are on sale. Call 0871 230 0333 or visit channel4.com/music. Next tonight on 4, from Hendrix to Live Aid, the UK Music Hall of Fame's countdown of the 20 seminal gigs of all time.